It is customary during a war to kill as many of the enemy as possible.
And was your court at the trial of Visser constituted in any way like this? What rule did you shoot him under?
Like this? Oh, no, sir, no, it wasn't quite like this. No, sir, it wasn't quite so handsome. And as for rules, we didn't carry military manuals around with us. We were out on the veldt, fighting the Boer, the way he fought us. I'll tell you what rule we applied, sir. We applied Rule 303.
Here I am, my favourite dining room. I've got to say the food has been superb. Consistently, not huge portions, which I think is good because, you know, I've been eating enough. Well, I'm having breakfast. I don't normally have breakfast, but this morning I had toast and marmalade and coffee because I had to meet Charles at 8. Charles. So anyway, as you're going to see, had the most fabulous day with Charles. Once he ascertained my degree of knowledge, which was, you know, more than a basic knowledge of the Boer War and of the case of Morant, Hancock, Witten, he launched straight into some deep dives. I think I asked very pertinent questions. The fact that I told him I'd interviewed George Witten's great nephew, I think stood me in good stead. I met the owner of the Lalapanzi, a very interesting woman, very kind. She offered to help in any way she could. I told her about my computer problems yesterday. She said they could have helped me solve that for me. Anyway, so we took off about, I met Charles at 8:30. Sorry, I met Charles at 8. We left about 8:30. And we drove into Louis Trichardt and we saw Fort Edward, the Iron Fort. Now, little did I realise, yesterday, I'd actually driven past it a number of times. But, yeah, so we saw it today. Unless you're looking for it, maybe, well, I did. I drove straight past it because I wasn't expecting it where it was. And then the whole day was just full of fascinating conversation, fascinating places where Morant, Hancock and Witten had been, the Bushveldt Carbineers. Wow, there's a fancy glass.
Yeah.
Look at this. Brilliant, a snifter. Daniel's bought me this. Beautiful. Coca-Cola. He's pulling my leg with this thing, but there you go. Alright, cheers. Here's to the Carbineers. So yeah, fascinating, you know, to be in the place where those men had, this is what you call the Zoutpansberg Mountains, I think, or the Spaloken Mountains. You'll hear the correct pronunciations later in the videos. To be in the same place as those men from the Bushveldt Carbineers is just absolutely memorable, as good as any day I've had in South Africa so far, as good as the Kedda Lodge, as good as Elands River, as good as the blockhouses, as good as Bella Bella. Just fantastic. And it's in quite a small vicinity. It's all centred around a little town called Elam. Now, Elam is where the German missionary Hesse was leaving when he was followed and shot by Hancock, supposedly. And Hancock was sleeping with a Boer woman, which was just over the ridge from where Hesse was shot, which was just over the ridge from Fort Edward, where they operated out of, all in this one small vicinity. Captain Taylor, Bullala Taylor, you'll hear about. There goes the cat. So, I'll do like I did with the Land River. I'll cut them into segments. Each one will have a theme. You might want to read the story of Breaker Morant and his time with the Bushveldt Carbineers. We'd heard about him at Diamond Hill, the Battle of Diamond Hill, where they described him as one of the best horsemen they'd ever seen. Excellent service record, but when he got up here, he snapped because of the death of Captain Hunt, but also, and he in the trial, he never denied executing Boers, but his defence was it was common practice, and it was an order coming from Kitchener to not take prisoners, to execute. But and that sounds okay in the movie, but when I'm at the graves of these Boers that were executed, some summarily executed, and some of them had to dig their own graves, it's hard to equate that as being an official order from the top brass, because some of these were not Boer fighters, they were kids. Anyway, you'll get to discover that as we break up the day's events into chapters. So what have I ordered? I've ordered a sirloin steak tonight with mashed potato instead of chips, as I predicted when Daniel Cook made me my picnic hamper for lunch today. They put cooked chips in the box, and instead of a sandwich, which I expected, it was a toasted sandwich, a cold toasted sandwich. They do things a bit different here. So not complaining. You got the sirloin steak for tonight with mashed potato. I think I'm going to have another hot bath tonight. That bath last night was so fantastic, so deep, so hot. I wish I had some bubble bath, but I might throw a bit of conditioner or something in the water. And then tomorrow I'm going to interview Bridget, find out about her. She seems an interesting girl. And then Friday I leave early to go back to Boksburg, and I'm going to stop in Petersburg on the way back to the house where the court-martial was held. You see it in that movie. It looks like a military barracks where they've been court-martialed as part of the fort in the film. Well, we know that the attack on the fort, which was another reason that they tried to get exonerated, was that they'd taken up arms and protected the fort against a Boer attack. It was some old law in English law, or an English statute, that if you took up arms and protected the English, then you would be cleared of any criminal. You couldn't be executed, something like that, you remember. But anyway, that fort was in Petersburg, and where they were court-martialed was a private house. Well, it's a private house now. I've got the address. I'm going to drive past there on the way home on Friday, see if we can film it a bit. Alright, so you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed filming it and getting to know Charles, and let's get going. Yeah, it's a bit...
Obviously, I don't know if there's load shedding right now.
There we go.
No, that's okay.
That's a bit better.
Let's sit.
Yeah, good.
Shall we sit here with a bit of light behind us?
Okay.
I need this light for the stuff. That. I just want to ask her if she's got a copy of this insert for me, because that is a
Okay.
That's an experiment you can ask everyone now.
Print out for me, so he's going to sort of cater for, too close to my face, what we want to do.
So that I don't wander off in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Let's start with your. What brought you here? What of the Bushveldt Carbineers and
Well, I'm an Australian, which explains a bit. Let's put that there. And I came to South Africa 3 weeks ago, primarily to see Boer War, Anglo-Boer War sites. So I've got a interest in military history, and the Boer War has always fascinated me. So of course, you know, the film Breaker Morant and the legend of Harry Morant and Peter Hancock. So I went to their graves in Pretoria.
You saw the inscription on the grave.
Yes.
Those of your something about those of your household will be your enemies.
Yeah, a quotation from the Bible, Luke or something. And so this was a must see. I had to come up here to because I'm on a Facebook group that has pictures of hotels and sites to see, and one of them was La Palanzi, the little museum here. So I also went out to Keita Lodge near Rustenburg.
Did you? I'm pleased you did that.
That was fantastic.
That broadens your horizon enormously.
I've been out for one day with Piet Costa at Elands River. I saw where the siege took place.
Right.
So this was top 3 for me to come here.
Okay. That's excellent. Okay, that gives me enough foundation ground under my feet. And I might add that one of the highest profile Australian groups that I've had here was led by he's now passed, His Excellency Tim Fisher.
Oh yes.
He brought a group out here.
Wow.
And it was quite an experience for me as well to host them. I met them in Mokopane. It used to be called Potita's Rust.
Right.
It's south of.
What's your background? I've just managed to get. I've been fiddling. Sorry, I've been listening, but I've been fiddling to get some. But what is your background? How did you get involved in this story of the Bushveldt Carbineers? Could you tell us a little? Or?
Okay, our 3 grandchildren are 7th generation of our family in this area, and my great grandfather's farm was part of what was Fort Edward. The fort was actually erected on a portion of his farm, and he died in December 1899. So he never lived to see the war. But his wife, my great grandmother, she survived him by 40 years, and she was very closely attached to that Fort Edward structure, because after the war it became a police station. And during the war, she and her 2 daughters, one of them being my grandmother, lived on that farm, and this is an interesting thing, that their farm was never burnt down. Both her son and her son-in-law, I'm speaking of my grandmother, were with the Soutpansberg Commando. Both of them were based in Petersburg, because Petersburg in those days, everything north of Petersburg was called Soutpansberg.
Right.
So the Soutpansberg Commando was established in Petersburg. My father was conscripted to the Soutpansberg Commando for the Second World War, and I did my military training with the Soutpansberg Commando as well.
Right.
So we go to 2 farms where the owners of those farms, okay, a lot of them have changed, but where the Soutpansberg Commando was active. But by the time we got to this stage, the Bushveldt Carbineers stage, the Soutpansberg Commando in this area was primarily, a lot of them had already left, a lot of them had been captured, and General Bayers was in command of the what we call the scatterlings. In some books they talk about the scatterings of the Soutpansberg Commando, but we've never got the final figure, but we estimate between about 270 and possibly about 350 members that were regular with him, that he could rely on.
Right.
But remember that at that stage already, Queen Victoria, you know, the connection, the family connections between the German Kaisers and the British monarchs and all that. She when the missionary was shot dead, when Hirse was shot dead, technically he was a German. They were German speaking. He was with the Berlin Mission Society, but because they were in the Cape Province, technically he was a Brit. But he was shot dead here by Hancock, who confessed this in prison, then withdrew his confession, and then brought it up again. And in that letter that Whitten that Whitten responds to Major Thomas, he writes there that in prison, again, Hancock confessed to having shot the missionary. So that raised all sorts of spectres as well. So what we don't have in writing, because obviously communication between monarchs wasn't always available to the general public, but all of a sudden, a little bit earlier than that already, the supply of Mauser rifles, which the Boers used, when the war started, they were issued with Mauser rifles.
Yes.
The Brits had 303s. So they all of a sudden there was no ammunition available anymore.
Right.
And in fact, this comes from Professor Louis Shangun, my mentor and my very good friend, the historian professor. He said that this was possibly Queen Victoria's, one of her attempts to bring this war to an end.
Yes.
Stop the supply of ammunition. So that is when the Boers went all out to capture not only rifles and ammunition by blowing up trains and things like that. There was a guy called Jack Hinden, an Irishman, who was a renowned...
We saw his grave at Middleburg.
Right. Jack Hinden, there was a regiment named after him, one of our military regiments after the war. Jack Hinden blew up a number of railway lines or tracks, actual trains. So the British guys knew that they at one stage they even tried to keep the minimum ammunition with them, and the limbers, the wagon that the cannon was always attached to a cannon, or in front of the cannon, the horses were pulling it. Those they carried fairly large supplies of 303 ammunition. They actually at one stage started getting them away from a cannon, because a cannon was not easy to move when you were under attack or something like that, or when there was a commando nearby. In order to try and prevent the Boers or to stop access to ammunition, 303 ammunition. We've got two 303 rifles in the museum there that take it to the next level. The Boers had no military training. They had no Sandhurst, and they had nothing like that.
No.
But when they captured the British 303, they didn't like the idea of a bayonet.
No.
They'd never been trained in bayonet warfare. They also didn't like the lancers, because the lancers was too close to the Zulu way of killing people.
Pig sticking.
Right. So the first thing they did was they cut off the front part of the barrel. In the field, they cut it off. In doing so, they cut the front side off. So the back side was worth nothing to them. So they knocked the back side off as well. So they were shooting at very close range. They were shooting, and okay, their accuracy over long distances was compromised, but they did very well. At one stage, General De La Rey's commando, who was mainly in the Western Transvaal, he actually writes there that he had over 1,000 British rifles in his commando.
Yeah.
A couple of these guys had 2 or 3 rifles.
One thing we have to remember, Charles, which came up in the court case, was the Boers had no clothing, so they wore British khaki.
Yeah. That was the other thing they had to. You see, where the British guys, they had their backup, their military backup. If they had no uniforms, they'd go to the quartermaster, or a transport would arrive with ammunition with clothing for them. The Boers had to supply their own horses, their own ammunition, their own clothing.
And they weren't necessarily, although they may have, doing it in a deceptive manner, but it was a matter of necessity.
It was a matter of necessity, and they called it, the term they used, the Dutch term was uitskit. You shake him out of his uniform, you take his boots, you take his uniform, and you send him off naked back to his regiment, because they know that he'll get another uniform from them.
Now, in your book, you make mention of I think it's a Jewish businessman that made a call to form the Bushveldt Carbineers. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, he was involved. It was what was his surname? It's
Levi.
Yes, they were the 2 brothers. They both were instrumental in forming the Bushveldt Carbineers by way of donations. Right. One of them was immediately appointed a captain. I mean, he'd never seen a military uniform other than when he was issuing stock from the, and he was made a captain So that was a sort of level, as I was saying, this whole command structure was off balance. It was just not on. So the Levi, they were based in Pretoria. Never came up here, but I think it's on the front over here where it says that little thing there tells the whole story of
recruits wanted.
Yeah, read that. Recruits wanted.
Bushveldt Carbineers organised in Pretoria for special service in northern districts of the Transvaal, Waterberg and Soutspannburg. Recruits wanted who can ride and shoot to proceed to Pretoria at once. Now, I can't read the small writing, but
There you are. Okay.
we've noticed that there were like Kitchener's Horse,
Kitchener's Fighting Scouts.
the Scottish Horse. These were like private companies formed, almost mercenaries. Would you say the Carbineers was something like that?
I wouldn't. Well, they were offered. They would offered a higher, for lack of military terminology, they were offered an increase in what their normal pay was. That was one of the conditions that they were offered. They were offered rank, which I find the worst of all. By all means, give him a few more shillings a month, but don't give him rank if he hasn't been through the correct procedures.
And behind the British, the Australians made up the bulk of the Carbineers.
Possibly, we've got no actual record of how many Australians were at one time here at Fort Edward. We have a rough idea. There were roughly 60.
Right. And they
But we don't. Bill Wilmore, who's also been on tour, one of your good Australian writers, he did a summary and he wrote a paragraph on each one of the Bushveldt Carbineers that he could have write something about. They were at least a fixture, if I may say a fixture, because they didn't have the means of saying, hey, I'm getting on my horse, I'm going back to my regiment in Pretoria or wherever. They didn't do that. They were here, whereas the Boers, and a lot of those Boers were what we call joiners. He had Kitchener's Fighting Scouts was a fairly large unit.
Steineker's Horse, I remember.
Steineker's Horse. They were down in the Komatipoort area. A lot of those guys were joiners. Now I maintain, and I haven't got this in writing, but having researched General Beyers and a few others, I maintain that Beyers, who was a brilliant military tactician, he was a lawyer. He was never a military man. He never had training. None of those guys had training. All those guys, none of them had military training. But Beyers was brilliant, and I will take you to the place today where he was sitting playing the piano. He was playing the piano in what was then known as Sweetwater's Hotel. His commando were sort of lounging around under the trees, and he was playing the piano. He was an educated man. He was a lawyer. His mother taught him to play the piano, and then he was playing the piano. Why? Because I believe that he had some of those guys who the picture is. I actually got permission from Bill Wilmore. Presenting arms. They're presenting arms. That's Bill Wilmore. At the grave.
Yeah. I saw in your book. There's a men on parade. There's an Australian flag, isn't there?
Well, it's a big flag. You can't really make out the stars on it, but you can see the Union Jack in the corner. And if you look at the funeral, or rather the burial of Hancock and Morant, there's the same. I believe it's the same flag. And that Union Jack, I'll show you the house where. She wasn't a relative of mine, but they lived next door to my great-grandparents. Olivia Bristow was busy stitching a flag one day when her husband, Charlie Bristow, arrived back at the farmhouse. And he said, by the way, we've got a visitor tonight. Our friend General Beyers is spending the night here. So she said to herself, she said, well, she better not cause a confrontation with this Union Jack. So she decided to put it under the pillow of the bed that he was sleeping on.
Wow.
And the next morning at breakfast, she asked him whether he'd slept well. And Beyers said, he didn't really sleep well. He said he had funny dreams and whatnot. And she said, one day I'll tell you why. No, those were her words. So that flag, I believe, is the one that they were parading under. And I actually challenged Bill Wilmore on that. I mean, maybe a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. But I said to Bill, regarding that photograph, pray tell, when did Australia as a colony, when did they declare war on South Africa? Or vice versa, when did South Africa declare war on them? And he said, what the hell do you mean? And I said, why are they presenting arms to the Australia flag? A present arms parade, military parade, is not a Mickey Mouse thing.
Sure.
It's a serious parade. And particularly with felled bayonets. So, anyway, he said, no, you're nitpicking. And I said, maybe I am, but I'm just looking at the military correctness of that parade. And he said he does concede that was maybe out of order. And again, Morant is taking the parade. He's standing in front and he's saluting. He didn't have his rifle. He wasn't presenting arms. He's saluting. Now, those guys, those officers, had so little background.
Yeah.
That they didn't know what was right or wrong. So,
if you were to see a Carbineer today in his uniform, you'd have no indication that he was an Australian. They didn't wear anything different than the British uniform in the Carbineers. Is that right?
Well, that I wouldn't know. Not having been to Australia, but I've seen a lot of. I have books that are specific to the Bushveldt Carbineers. I think I've got 9 of them.
Yeah.
There's one of the last ones, who was written by a very good friend of mine who died the day that book was published. He died of a heart attack. Joe West. Joe West was on tour with me a number of times, a Brit historian, and he wrote a book called The Final Roundup, which is brilliant. I have a copy of that, and I've got every other book that I could get written specifically to the Bushveldt Carbineers.
Do you think without that film there'd be any interest at all?
That's a good question. Possibly not. Possibly not, Terry.
Yeah.
What I do have a bit of a problem was that very first film that was made by an American. There's a poster in our laboratory where Morant is played by the character. Morant is portrayed by a very well-known Australian. Hey guys, I can't pass you when I've got a truck and you in the road. So yes, I have a problem with the way in which the character who played the role of Morant was one of, and I think he was Edward Woodward or somebody like that.
Woodward. Yep.
Yeah. What a fine gentleman.
Yeah.
Was that
good
Morant?
actor.
Was that Morant? I mean, this last movie that's been made, I'll grab the next street. The last movie that was made showed Morant on his horse trying to get into the pub or something like that. It showed his wife shouting at him, "You lied to me! You lied to me!" Apparently something to do with their wedding that was held in a little pub or something, or lodge or whatever, that belonged to her, one of her relatives, and the bill was never settled or something like that.
Right.
So you know, and I still ask myself the question: Is this the portrayal of an Australian hero? This guy who's didn't pay the bill, who's tries to get his horse into the pub. Is this what Australia regards as a hero? I don't see that.
It's a bit like Ned Kelly. He's a hero,
Exactly.
and he's a villain.
Absolutely. And isn't there a town that commemorates him? I know.
There's lots, and he brings a lot of tourism into wherever he was. But you know, it's just sticking your finger up at authority, and especially the British. Absolutely. You know, we had a thing about the British. We didn't like saluting their officers. We thought they were stuck up and blundering twits.
Well, you know, to a certain degree, South Africa was also haunted by British customs and all sorts of things to do with the Britons.
We were more like South Africans than British.
Oh, well, that's the sort of feeling that I have. But really, it's not.
So where are we going now?
I'm going to show you the steel fort.
Oh, brilliant!
The actual structure.
Fort Edward.
Fort Edward, yeah. It was first called Fort Hendrina after General Joubert's wife, Hendrina.
I thought it was at Lovegrove Park or something.
Lovedale Park. That was my great-grandfather's property. doubt.
And it's been moved from there.
Yeah. And it was moved many years after. Well, it was first moved. Sorry, thank you. It was.
Oh, there it is.
There were 3 of them.
There it is.
There were only 3